A story about the Daily Word. I was raised in Waco, Texas, and I'm a graduate of what, when I graduated, we referred to it as Baylor Baptist University. Now it's mostly just Baylor. But you can imagine my parents' disappointment. I spent most of my adult life in Washington, D.C., so you can imagine my parents' disappointment when I told them in my early 40s that I had found this new church to go to called Unity. Well, I'm sure that moved me right up to the top of my mother's prayer list. And she had no idea what to think, but I knew that when I got home next, I would be able to trump that doubt. Because as far back as I can remember, my mother read the Daily Word to us. So when I got home the next time, and I thought, now when she starts in asking me to come back to my Baptist faith, I'm going to pause right after we read the Daily Word, and I'm going to say, Mother, do you know where the Daily Word comes from? No. And I said, well, just look on the back at the address. And so, of course, it said Unity School of Christianity. Now, she forgave me, and we've been happily Baptists and Unitics for the rest of our lives. And I also told Judy, I keep that thing in my bio about being in the crowd in D.C. when Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And I said, I dread the day when my grandchildren are talking to their children and they're going to say something like, well, my grandmother, she was either there for the signing of the Declaration of Independence, because no sense of date or time. So all that is to say that I've been around for a long time. So I'm really honored that Kim would trust me with what I consider to be this divine assignment again. I love this group. I love who you are, and it's a pleasure always to be with you. So Kim shared with me that you're in the process of doing a series on self-mastery. And I said, well, I have a theory about that, and that is that we need to move in our lives from self-mystery to self-mastery. And I also like the notion of her teaching self-mastery because Unity Principle number 2 said there is a spark of divinity in each of us. So I think when we own and recognize and achieve that spark of divinity, that's when we're in the presence of self-mastery. So to help unravel the mystery to self-mastery sort of thing, I wanted to begin with a quote from Stephen Covey. Now, again, being around as long as I have, one of the careers I had was I got to spend 17 years working for Dr. Stephen Covey. And he wrote that little book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which stayed number 1 on the bestseller list for 12 years. That was quite an accomplishment. Anyway, one of the things that Covey used to say to us in staff meetings is we are here to do 4 things: to live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy. Now, I think the leave a legacy is the equivalent of the self-mastery that Kim is talking to us about. So, how do we achieve self-mastery? That's one of those things that's a little bit easier said than done. So, Covey and the 7 habits, habit number 1 was begin with the end in mind. So where do we begin? If the end in mind is self-mastery, what does that look like? And my sense is that's where we need to begin so that we then can go back and live and construct our lives in such a way that we're honoring that called mastery. So how do you know what mastery is for you? Well, in the Covey domain and a lot of others, we called it writing a personal mission statement. What's your vision for yourself? And the first time I had that as a topic or an assignment, I got so excited and I finally honed it down to 4 typewritten pages, and Covey said, now, get that down to 1 page. And I thought, but I have to leave out so much of this really cool stuff here. But I got it down to a page, and then not just me, but his challenge to all of us participating in this particular class was now get it down to a sentence. Because if someone said, what is your mission statement, they don't have time to listen to you to recite all of this stuff. So if your mission statement were one sentence, what would it be? So about 20 or 25 years ago, I came up with a mission statement of I am a yes to life. Now that can be a scary thing. There's a lot of things in life that it's pretty easy to say yes to. There are other things where saying yes is a bit more of a challenge. So how do I know when I have achieved self-mastery? Well, yeah, you can do the mission statement and say, okay, that's my end in mind up there. Or the other thing is, the other way that they ask people to go about doing this is they'll say, what is it you want people to say about you at your memorial service? And I think, oh, well, if I'm going to want them to say this and this and this, I got my work cut out for me. So what if I died tomorrow? Would they say that stuff that I'm holding out there in a vision somewhere? Maybe not. So the deal is, I think we begin with our definition of what self-mastery or our vision for our lives is. And then we start to live into that so that we can be a work in progress. So when I got my mission statement down to I am a yes to life, people would say to me, what does that mean? And I said, well, it boils down that when I'm in a particular situation, whether it is with a person, an event, a business situation, what is it in this or this person that I'm able to say yes to? And it is, what is it? It's easier to say no when there's a larger yes burning inside, but if you don't know what the larger yes is, then it becomes real hard for you to say no. So let's look at Covey's 4 criteria that we are here to live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy, and see if we can't connect that to living into our vision of self-mastery. So when we talk about to live, that first journey, that's the kind of the basic beginnings. We have to eat to live, but we know that we don't, for example, that can't be fulfilling because if you're like me and you have a wonderful meal, about an hour later you're hungry again. So eating a meal doesn't just solve the problem of that. And I think it's how we choose to take care of our bodies. I'm not quite ready to die and have people say some of the things I'd like for them to say because I'm not there yet. I'm a work in progress. And so every day I need to pay attention to, I'm 5 mornings a week for over 11 years. There's a group of 8 of us that show up every morning and work out together. And if you miss for any reason, they will hunt you down. So it's a great accountability structure as well. So I think, okay, on the living thing, that's something I have to continue to do. I can't eat one meal or work out one time and be able to check that box off. So I think we have to be more attentive about that one. Okay, to live, to love, that's really the quality of nurturing. It's where we get to define who we want to be in relationship with another person or with other people, whether it's people at work, people in our family, people at home. And what I've noticed about myself and maybe others of us from time to time is we may behave very differently with our family than we do with, let's say, some of the people at work, or the person who is taking an unusually long time to check out in the line in front of me, because even though nobody writes a check anymore, she does. And so there's a part of me that wants to set aside the love part and just kind of roll my eyes or sigh very loudly or stuff like that. But so the deal is, if we're here to love thy neighbor as thyself, then we have to be open to loving or finding something to love about everybody and everything that comes into our life. I know, for example, in the workplace, I had this boss one time who would get our particular group together. And one of the ways he would make us feel really good teammates is he would tell us what was wrong with this other group over here. And so every once in a while they could see us talking together and we would laugh, and this group was over here saying, well, why isn't she saying that to us? So I thought I was building kind of a relationship with you guys, except one day you saw me over here and I was talking to them about some stuff and they laughed even louder than you did. So now you're fairly certain that I'm talking about them. So the message here is if we're going to be in relationship with someone, choose who you're going to be in relationship with, not because I work with you or because you're my family or because you're my friend, but if I am in relationship with you, there are some standards and behaviors that I will hold accountable for all of us. So it's a bit more of a tricky time, and we may spend a little bit more time in this relationship dimension because it takes a lot more to create those kind of relationships than it does to knock off a platter of food, which was in the to live part. So the other thing too is broken promises. I think one of the hardest things we do in relationship, particularly those of us who may have had very busy careers, there were times when we felt like we might have to sacrifice what I told my kids I would be at the soccer game at 5 o'clock, and yet our team is having this going away wine tasting for this party, so I'll be, you know, and it's not to say that there's something wrong with either one, but how do you honor the relationship here so that you're not doing a disservice to the other? So I think the only person who can answer that is you for yourself, and to say, I need to keep a commitment. I know one of the clients I was working with at Covey, he was the CEO of what's now called Presbyterian Healthcare of Texas, whatever that big Presbyterian system is. And his administrative assistant said invariably on the day that her kids had a game or she had to be somewhere, he would come running in 10 minutes before she was to get off work, and he would have this critical assignment for her to do. And so she was always torn. He is my boss, he pays my paycheck. So she said to him one day, can I have 15 minutes of your time to discuss a matter that I think is important to both of us? And he said yes. And so she explained that she had a commitment to her family, and on certain days this has happened. She said, what I've noticed is that more often than not, once or twice a week, you'll come to me at the last minute. And it means that I either have to break my promise to them or turn you down. And he wasn't even conscious that he was doing that. He said, oh my gosh, I'd had that on my mind all day. I don't know why I waited until the last minute to tell you. So he said, will you coach me and help me in creating this relationship? I was very proud of any CEO who would say that. And so she would be able to say to him, I have another commitment, and he understood. Or the better option was he stopped coming to her at the last minute. But sometimes it takes a lot of courage in this relationship issue around the to love thing in order to state your boundaries. There was another example that came to mind. A woman told me one time that she worked for this company, a big sales company, and she reported to the CEO. And he asked her to call one of their key clients and deliver a certain message. And she said, I knew that the message that he was asking me to deliver was not in sync with what our bottom line said we were doing. And so she said, I had this fight with my conscience. So she said, I better polish up my resume and go in there and tell him that I'm not going to do that. So she went in and said to him, when you hired me, you hired a person of integrity. And I'm proud of that. And she said, what you're asking me to do is a violation of my integrity. And so I'm unwilling to call the client and give them that message. And she was waiting for him to say, you're fired. And he said instead, thank you for reminding me what this company is supposed to be about. I withdraw that request and we'll handle it differently. But more often than not, it takes a lot of courage in the face of a boss or a superior person under any circumstances to stand up to them and say, this is who I am, and what you're asking me to do is a violation of that integrity. Now, if they insisted you go ahead and violate your integrity, my question is, you shouldn't probably be working there anyway. So anyway, there are ways to get to self-mastery that require you to do some soul-searching and then to be open with other people about what's important to you. The Dallas Morning News, this was many, many years ago, they did an article as a result of an intervention, I called it an intervention, that Covey did with a group in Texas. And there were some farmers and ranchers who had a specific idea about the land use in a certain part of Texas. The environmentalist had a very different perspective about how that land should be used. And so Covey was brought in to help them resolve this difference. And what Covey did, let's say that you're the ranchers and you're the environmentalists. And Covey says, I'm willing to hear each of you, but you guys over here, you need to be able to tell me their goals with sincerity and objectivity until you convince me that you know what they're up to as well as they do. And guess what? You guys are going to have to meet with the ranchers over here, find out what their vision is for this, and then before you can share your own vision, you have to share with me their vision. Well, in the 7 Habits, he calls that seek first to understand, then to be understood. As a result of having the leaders from the environmentalists and the ranchers get together, the group collectively came up with this thing called Planet Texas, Plan-IT, Texas, and it was a whole vision for land use in Texas. But he had to do that by getting both of them out of a space of being argumentative, you see, and seeing where another person is. So sometimes when we, oh shoot, that reminded, I'm going to tell this one again too. I was teaching a 7 Habits class, and we were on this, we were doing the whole mission statement thing, and I said, well, come in tomorrow and tell me how that's working with you. And so when they came into class on day 2, I said, so what did you learn last night? Because Covey had spoken that day about, remember Pavlov's dogs? He used to be able to ring a bell, and then you'd feed the dogs, and you'd ring a bell. It got to the point where if you rang a bell, the dogs would start salivating, whether you... And Covey had made the point that humans, unlike animals, are the only species that can hit the pause button between stimulus and response. This is what happened. I'm going to think about how I want to respond instead of just... So that was part of the assignment in this class that I was having them do. Well, the next day when I said, how'd you do with the stimulus response thing? This young man raised his hand and he said, well, here's my story. He said, I have a classic Porsche automobile, and it is my pride and joy, and it stays parked in my garage all the time. And he said, I also have a 4-year-old son. And a lot of people told me that a prize Porsche and a 4-year-old son were probably not a good combination under the same roof. But he said, I had outfoxed my son, or so I thought. And I said to him, how would you like to be in charge of protecting Daddy's car? And very pleased, he said, so here's the deal. When your little friends come over to play, we don't go in the garage and look at, touch, or do anything to Daddy's car. We don't let bugs get on Daddy's car. We don't do any of that. Can you be in charge of that, son? Yes, I can. So the dad said it was a rather uneventful negotiation until he came home one day, and his son greeted him at the front door and said, I got to defend your car today. Well, rather than feeling excited, the dad got really, really worried. However, he said, I don't know what he's talking about. He said, great, come and show me how you protected Daddy's car. So he said, the little boy ran to the garage and said, I smashed a bug on the windshield today. And it was clear that he had done that, but Daddy said he didn't use a fly swatter. He probably used a 2x4 or whatever the equipment was. So in addition to having a very dead bug, he had a very smashed windshield. He said in that moment, everything in him wanted to be like Pavlov's dogs. And just, he said, I wanted to pick that kid up by the scruff of the neck. I wanted to throw him into the middle of the next week, and if I never saw him again, it would be okay. And someday, if I ever felt guilty about it, I would apologize to him. But he said, then I remembered that between stimulus and response, I have a choice. So he said, I reached down and I hugged my son, and I thanked him for protecting Daddy's car. Now, he said at dinner that night, I suggested some alternative ways of protecting Daddy's car should this happen in the future, but that story stayed with me because sometimes it takes a whole lot of courage in the moment to make a stand for who you say you are. And the easier thing is just to go ahead and spank the kid and then hope someday he forgives you. But then again, if I die tomorrow, what's the kid going to say about me at my memorial service? Probably not that I was an understanding father about all of that sort of stuff. So, all right, to live, to love, to learn, and finally to leave a legacy. This is really the spiritual dimension. I think it's unity principle number 4 that says there is a spark of divinity in each of us. And I think it is when we are present to that spark of divinity that we know that we are living a legacy, or to use Kim's term that you're studying here, that's when you can pretty much know that you're at self-mastery. It's the way we express God. I remember one time when oh gosh, I was working for a retail company in Washington, D.C., which is where I spent most of my adult life. And I remember my boss coming up to me one time and saying, you know what? Last year on the United Givers campaign, we've never raised as much money as we did when you were chair of it. And I thought, yeah, and I never saw my family, and I worked 15 hours a day. He said, so because we made so much money, we would be crazy not to ask you to do it again this year. So my first thought was, if I deny the request, I'm denying the flattery. And then I thought, well, I'll just separate the two. I agree. I too was proud of what we accomplished last year, and I'm not available to take on that assignment this year. So we need to give ourselves permission sometimes by separating who we are from what we are being asked to do. To me, that is the true way of going from self-mystery to self-mastery. So it's a little bit like we begin with self-mastery, so that if something happened to me tomorrow, have I lived my life and nurtured my relationships in such a way that the people at my memorial service would say everything I would hope they would say? And if not, then we have an opportunity today and tomorrow and on and on and on to work on this thing called self-mastery. Thank you very much.
Oh.